Last month, something very strange happened. My 4 friends and I went to a local haunted area for a scare and to kill the evening. It was about 9 p.m., so it was as dark as it was going to get for the night. We were arriving at the spot when it started to get extremely foggy, to the point where you could hardly see in front of you. Definitely the scene for a scary evening. We started to slow down to park, and I saw a look of terror on my friend's face. A look of terror that no one can fake. He then said, "Accelerate," in the tone that both intrigued and terrified me at the same time. Without really thinking, I just sped up about 10 miles per hour faster than I had been going, just assuming the spot that we were in scared him a bit. As we went further up the road, the restlessness that he felt only proceeded to get worse. At this point, I just wanted to get out of where we were, as his fear was beginning to rub off on me. As I continued to pick up speed, I saw what had scared him so bad. I had only seen it for a split second before I heard the crunches and felt the car go over a bump that no one would want to acknowledge, but was impossible to ignore. I panicked in a way that I'd never had before, and stopped the car with such force that we all jerked forward into what was in front of us. Ignoring the pain with adrenaline and shock, we got out to inspect what my fear and carelessness had done, and after seeing what was there, I wish I had kept driving. The man was lying in a pool of blood, his chest flattened from one line of wheels, and his feet flattened from the other line. It was a sight that I knew would stick in my mind, as well as my friends, for as long as we shall live. After the disgust and horror we all witnessed, I convinced everyone to get back into the car. Once we all got into the car, the weather had completely cleared, as if the tension in the area had been relieved. I had no choice but to take all of my friends home with the scars that I knew would haunt them for the rest of their lives. On the way home, no one spoke of the gore that we had just witnessed, and I had no problem with that. I felt like there had been a presence following us, but I just brushed it off as shock and went on with my driving. I dropped off all of my friends, making them promise that the event would never be spoken of to anyone. I then made my way to my house to cleanse my car of the horror that it had endured. I hosed my tires and bumper off, and then I went into the house to take a shower. I still had the feeling of a presence, which had begun to give me a very unsettling feeling in the pit of my stomach, but I knew that it was just guilt. Guilt is the mind's form of karmic retribution. No one can completely get away with something. I went to bed once I got out of the shower, hoping that I could sleep this terrible night from existence. It took about 2 hours for me to finally fall asleep, but that would be the worst mistake of my life. I woke up about 3 hours later to the worst sight of my life. At the foot of my bed, I saw the face of my accident. Sitting no more than 2 feet away from me was the personification of fear. His body was mangled, his chest was flattened along with the lower half of his legs. He sensed my being awake through my fear and turned to look at me. He had no eyes, but the socket showed all the pain and anger that he felt. This was coupled, however, with a sixth sense of amusement that he got from the control that he had over my sanity. He lunged for me, getting within mere inches of my face. Even though he had no eyes, I still felt as though he could see right through the very light of my existence. He then whispered in a tone of pure terror, "Forever," and crawled out of my room. I ran out of my house into my car and drove. I drove for 6 hours straight, well into the daytime. I don't know what the creature was, but I do know that he will be forever with me, with me as a constant reminder of how fear and panic can ruin one's life. During the summer of 2003, events in the northern United States involving a strange human-like creature sparked brief local media interest before an apparent blackout was enacted. Little or no information was left intact, as most online and written accounts of the creatures were mysteriously destroyed. Primarily focused in rural New York State and once in Idaho, self-proclaimed witnesses told stories of their encounters with the creature of unknown origin. Emotions ranged from extremely traumatic levels of fright and discomfort to an almost childlike sense of playfulness and curiosity. While their published versions are no longer on record, the memories remained powerful. Several of the involved parties began looking for answers that year. In early 2006, the collaboration had accumulated nearly 24 documents dating between the 12th century and present day, spanning 4 continents. In almost all cases, the stories were identical. I've been in contact with the member of this group and was able to get some excerpts from their upcoming book. A suicide note, 1964. As I prepare to take my life, I feel it necessary to assuage any guilt or pain I have introduced through this act. It is not the fault of anyone other than him. For once, I awoke and felt his presence. And once, I awoke and saw his form. Once again, I awoke and heard his voice, and then looked into his eyes. I cannot sleep without fear of what I might next awake to experience. I cannot ever wake. Goodbye. Found in the same wooden box were 2 empty envelopes addressed to William and Rose, and 1 loose personal letter with no envelope. Dearest Linny, I have prayed for you. He spoke your name. A journal entry, translated from Spanish, 1880. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I have experienced the greatest terror. I see his eyes when I close mine. They are hollow, black. They saw me and pierced me. His wet hand, I will not sleep. His voice, and then some unintelligible text. A mariner's log, 1691. He came to me in my sleep. From the foot of my bed, I felt a sensation. He took everything. We must return to England. We shall not come here again at the request of the Rake. From a witness, 2006. 3 years ago, I had just returned from a trip to Niagara Falls with my family for the 4th of July. We were all very exhausted after a long day of driving, so my husband and I put the kids straight to bed and called it a night. At about 4 a.m., I woke up thinking my husband had gotten up to use the restroom. I used the moment to steal back the sheets, only to wake him in the process. I apologized and told him that I thought he was out of bed. When he turned to face me, he gasped and pulled his feet up from the end of the bed so quickly. His knees almost knocked me out of bed. He then grabbed me and said nothing. After adjusting to the dark for a half second, I was able to see what caused the strange reaction. At the foot of the bed, sitting and facing away from us, was what appeared to be a naked man, or a large hairless dog of some sort. Its body position was disturbing and unnatural, as if it had been hit by a car or something. For some reason, I was not instantly frightened by it, but more concerned as to its condition. At this point, I was somewhat under the assumption that we were supposed to help him. My husband was peering over his arm and knee, tucked into a fetal position, occasionally glancing at me before returning to the creature. In a flurry of motion, it scrambled around the side of the bed, and then crawled quickly in a flailing sort of way right along the covers until it was less than a foot away from my husband's face. It was completely silent for about 30 seconds. Probably closer to 5, but it seemed like a while, and it was just looking at my husband. It then placed its hands on its knees and ran into the hallway, leading to the kids' room. I screamed and ran for the light switch, planning to stop this thing before it hurt my children. When I got to the hallway, the light from the bedroom was enough to see it crouched and hunched over, about 20 feet away. It turned around and looked directly at me, covered in blood. I flipped the switch on the wall and saw my daughter Clara. The creature ran down the stairs as my husband and I rushed to help our daughter. She was badly injured and spoke only once more in her short life. She said, "He is the Rake." My husband drove his car into the lake that night while rushing our daughter to the hospital. They did not survive. Being a small town, news got around pretty quickly. The police were helpful at first, and the local newspaper took a lot of interest as well. However, the story was never published, and the local television news never followed up either. For several months, my son Justin and I stayed in a hotel near my parents' house. After we decided to return home, I began looking for answers myself. I eventually located a man in the next town over who had a similar story. We got in contact and talked about our experience. He knew of 2 other people in New York who had seen the creature we now referred to as the Rake. It took the 4 of us 2 solid years of hunting on the internet and writing letters to come up with a small collection of what we believed to be accounts of the Rake. None of them gave any details, history, or follow-up. One journal had an entry involving the creature in its first 3 pages, then never mentioned it again. A ship's log explained nothing of the encounter, saying only that they were told to leave by the Rake. That was the last entry in the log. There were, however, many instances where the creature's visit was one of a series of visits with the same person. Multiple people also mentioned being spoken to, my daughter included. This led us to wonder if the Rake had visited any of us before the encounter. I set a digital recorder near my bed and left it running all night, every night, for 2 weeks. I would tediously scan through the sounds of me rolling around in bed each day when I woke up. By the end of the 2nd week, I was quite used to the occasional sound of sleep while blaring through the recording at 8 times the normal speed. It still took almost an hour every day. On the first day of the 3rd week, I thought I heard something different. What I found was a shrill voice. It was the Rake. I can't listen to it long enough to even begin to transcribe it. I haven't let anyone listen to it yet. All I know is that I've heard it before, and I now believe that it spoke when it was sitting in front of my husband. I don't remember hearing anything at the time, but for some reason, the voice on that recorder immediately brings me back to that moment. The thoughts that must have gone through my daughter's head make me very upset. I have not seen the Rake since he ruined my life, but I know that he's in my room while I slept. I know and fear that one night I'll wake up to see him staring at me. The warnings first came through on social media. It was a fairly ordinary Sunday morning as I sat behind the intriguing screen of my computer. For some many hours, I had been checking my feed on Facebook when an article caught my eye. Now, I'm not some sucker who gets drawn to obviously fake messages spawned by trolls online, but hey, it was a Sunday and I was bored. One of my friends had shared an article entitled "The End," and if I had half my wits about me, then I wouldn't have even contemplated reading it. But I did, and that would soon become the most frightening mistake of my life. The article proceeded to explain how our world was coming to an end, and that the sun was going to devastate our planet. It urged everyone to seek shelter, although it would do no good. Of course, the comments were a mess of arguments and the occasional rant of someone who took the message way too seriously. Back then, I paid no mind to the useless article and had closed the tab almost as soon as I opened it. I can't recall the rest of that day, but I assume that it carried on as normal. The next day, however, was when things got slightly concerning. I'm not sure if it was all the talk about this message at school, but as soon as I got home, I decided to examine the website again. I had gotten to the bottom of the page when the number of viewership got my attention. Over 1 billion people had viewed the page-long article. I will admit, that slightly freaked me out. I mean, 1 billion views? Was that even possible? And then the most prominent question, why was everyone so interested in it? That was when I noticed that the TV was blaring out an emergency message. On the screen was a video of a man behind a pedestal, clad in a very smart suit. I had missed the majority of the broadcast, but I do remember the last part. He said, "Supernova, in our galaxy, only days away. There is no force on Earth that can stop nature from running its course. The end is near. God, help us all." I remember standing there, my voice caught in my throat, and not being able to comprehend with the news. What were they talking about? It was only after I had searched endlessly online that facts were clear to me. The sun was due to explode, and it was going to bring Earth down with it. Everybody was talking about this, and I'm not talking about a few million, I'm talking a few billion. I remembered the article linked from Facebook with its billions of views, and then I could comprehend. And boy, I did not take it well. I didn't have much time to sob in despair, as my dad had come rushing in. Imagine the talk we had. In the end, we thought it best to gather our supplies and seek refuge in our fallout shelter which Dad had gotten a few months ago. I offered to run to the store and gather food, although we all knew that this plan was futile. But we were desperate, and anything beats standing outside and waiting to die. I ran to the supermarket, my eyes clogged with tears and my face scrunched up in an expression of utter despair. When I arrived at the supermarket, I was swarmed by almost the whole suburb who had gotten the same idea as well. It was only once I had gotten in the midst of the crowd that the fighting had began. The store clerk had shut the doors, despite the amount of food left inside. People were rioting, throwing punches and practically killing each other. I'd gotten several meters ahead when some guy turned on me and brandished a knife from his pocket. I couldn't understand what he said, but I knew he was demanding me to give him something. Money, perhaps? Or food? I couldn't be too sure, but the knife was definitely very intimidating. A loud bang came from behind me, and it was in that brief moment, when his gaze was averted elsewhere, that I seized my chance. I managed to wrestle the knife into my hands, and when he came running at me, I simply held it in front of me and allowed him to walk into it. I had never killed anyone before, but there he was, his eyes wide and his mouth gaping. He gave a slight choke, then slumped to the ground dead. I don't know what came over me then, but I suddenly found a sense of survival. I used my knife to threaten people into giving me food, and usually it worked. I didn't want to waste what little time I had left cluttering about with a bunch of strangers when I could have been at home with my parents. One woman, when I asked her for the cans she had stowed away in her bag, screeched and came at me, her arms flailing wildly. She too lay dead very soon. I don't know how many people I had to kill, but when I returned home, I was relieved that I'd managed to scavenge some food. What I came home to was not something I had expected to find. My parents were sitting on the couch, staring at the screen intently and holding back laughter. As I stepped into the room, I saw the headlines on the news. End of the world statement, a hoax. Hackers arrested and awaiting trial. And it showed a video of several people in handcuffs. One of them, the man in the suit on the previous report. My parents were still chuckling with slight laughter when they turned around to see me standing at the door, my hands and forearms soaked in fresh blood, with a knife in my hand and a backpack full of supplies. I began to laugh, slowly at first, then progressively louder in pitch. I don't know why, but something about the whole scenario seemed so amusing. My mom stifled a gasp at the sight of me, and I can tell you, their smiles soon faded after that. There it is again, just there, in my world, where it has no right to be, and it's just dangling so. It's right there, right in front of me, so provocative, dangling in my face, taunting me, daring me. How can I not? How can I resist? Why should I resist? She knows the rules. She knows full well what she's doing. Do I go insinuating myself into her world? No, I don't. Not ever. I know my place and I stay there. I know the boundaries and the rules just as well as she. Her world, my world. It's clear. We had an understanding. I stay out of her world. She stays out of mine. Harmony. Coexistence. Order. That's the balance that allows us both to go on. It works. Neither of us needs to bother the other. We keep to ourselves until one of us goes and does that. The big no-no. One of us just lets it dangle in the other's face, challenging the other to fight the urge and leave it alone. But how can one change one's nature? It's impossible. How could anybody leave it alone? You don't tease the wolf by parading your nice plump sheep in its face. Don't expect the wolf to go easy on the sheep. A wolf does what a wolf does. A wolf has needs. And this is the same thing exactly, just different animals. Different quarry, different meat. It's not right to expect me not to when I am the wolf and she is the sheep. I can't fight my nature any more than the wolf can. But we all have our decisions. She's made hers, and now I've got the choice to make. Do I do it? Or do I ignore it and let it go? Do I let it slide? Again? I don't know that I should this time. Maybe this has happened once too often. Maybe this is the last straw. There's only so much I can take before I take what's on offer. And I can just imagine how glorious it would be. I can picture it right now. I can almost taste the anticipation. The victory, the conquest. I can taste it. And maybe I should taste it. Because that's what this all boils down to, does it not? She is daring me not to taste it. But how would you feel then, I ask you? She would regret it, that's how. She would rue the day that she let it just hang there that one last time. That was one too many times. But it would be too late for her to take it back at that point. It would be gone by then. I'd have taken the bait and would have relished doing so. And for what? Why did she do it? One can only imagine. The wolf doesn't know what the sheep thinks as it pounces. It wouldn't be nice to know it was all your own fault though. Of that, I'm sure. Knowing you asked for it. Because that's exactly what she's doing. She's asking for it. She's begging me for it. She's begging me to do it. But is that what she really wants? Or is she just flirting with me? Toying with me? Showing me what I can't have? But if that's her game, she's wrong. She's lost because it's right there. Just dangling. I can have it. I have absolute control. I need to make a decision. Do I do what I do best and take what's on offer? Or do I show mercy? Or do I show mercy and let it slide just one more time? Everything hangs in the balance here because I can't decide. So what do I do if I can't decide? I don't have a coin to toss. I don't have a magic 8-ball to devise an answer for me. It's up to me to make the call. And if I think about it, does that make the challenge even more exciting? It does, in fact, yes. I love that this is my call. I hold the cards in her future in my hands. That is true power. I could just reach out and take the low-hanging fruit, but would it be what I expect it to be? Would it live up to my expectations? Would it be as satisfying as I'm picturing it? Or would it disappoint? Well, there's only one way to find out. So I guess that's it then. I'm going to do it. The cards are dealt. It's really happening this time. I've pictured this more often than I can remember. I've let her get away with this too many times out of a sense of restraint, or charity, or something. But that charity ends now. Charity begins at home, they say. And that thing is dangling in my home, just where it really should not be. This won't be pretty. She'll be sorry. Bringing that thing into my home, that foot of hers, in my home, in my world, just dangling there over the edge of the bed. It's unsocked, that foot, naked, vulnerable. But even so, if she thinks that thin veil would protect it while she sleeps, she has another thing coming. Because nothing can stop me. Nothing can keep it safe, that wholesome pink flesh. There is no protection. It's all mine. It's history. done for. Enough talking. No more Mr. Nice Guy. This time, it's the real deal. I'm making my move. And so I crawl and creep towards it, from under the bed, just where she knows I am. Here in the dark. But does she know I'm here? Of course she does. She's always known it. She loves it, but she won't love it in a moment. Not at all. This will be very ugly, very brutal, but not for me. For me, this will be exquisite. This will be everything I dreamed it could be. And I'm almost there, about to fulfill my purpose. I can just reach out easily now and pluck. It's gone. It's that close, that simple, and closer I creep still. I can creep as slowly as I want and with all the patience in the world because this is the deal we made, even though she didn't quite believe it was real. She'd always suspected, been paranoid it could be so. In the dark recesses of her mind, ever since she was a child, she inherently feared this. And she's about to find out that she was right to fear it. I'm there. I was always there, lying in wait for a moment just like this. And the moment is almost over now. Because, look at it. Just look at it. That lovely foot, and those lovely fat little toes. I could eat them one by one, pluck them right off the vine like grapes, juicy and ripe. Those toes aren't hers anymore, not since she dangled them down in my world. Now, they're mine, and there's only one place they're going. In just one swift movement, they'll be inside me, gobbled up, bitten clean off by my perfect sharp teeth. My, what big teeth you have, Mr. Wolf. Oh yes, you bet I have. Because this is my purpose, to use my teeth on things that dangle. I bite them right off, and I don't care one iota that she's asleep. It's tough though. It's her fault. Because in I go now. In for the kill. I'm there. My mouth is round it. It's practically already done. It's in my mouth. I just need to bite down and let it be over. Bite it right off. I could pull away though, if I chose. Show mercy. Let it go. And she would never know how close she had come to losing it. That foot and those silly pink toes. I won't pull away. Not this time. No, I'm going for it. But what? How? I don't understand. We had a deal. She put it there. She dangled it into my world, did she not? It was there, plainly dangling over the edge of the bed. How could she do this to me? The bargain had been made. I went in for the kill. I went in to bite as was my right. But she moved it. She took it away just before I could bite it clean off. So, that's it then. She's won. She's survived. Again. I was too slow. I see that now. But I won't make the same mistake next time. Because there will be a next time. I'll address my nature, my performance, my failure for next time. Because she can't help herself. She wants it. She loves it. This danger, this fight, this game of cat and mouse, wolf and sheep. And I know she will certainly do it again. It will dangle again in my world. Maybe tomorrow night. Maybe the next. And if it does, I'll be ready. I'll be just here, lying in wait, in my world, right here under the bed, where everyone knows I am, just waiting for it to dangle. Good night. Please, don't actually try this. What I'm about to share with you today is one of the many relatively safe ways in which you can access a place called the shadow side. And its effectiveness depends on how seriously you take me. Your mileage may vary. Refer to the title. I won't tell you that you shouldn't be afraid of the shadow side. Chances are you've already seen it after all, and merely think it was just a reoccurring dream. I will tell you there is no need to be ignorantly afraid of it though. There is a difference. Ignorance fuels fear, and fear can give that place a lot of juice to run on. You have to be big on preparation if you want to try this. It's like skydiving. If getting it right on your first try is not something you're good at, then this is not for you. If you do drugs or alcohol the night of the event, you're going to have a bad time. If you're going through some serious issues in your life and not feeling mentally or spiritually stable, or if you're doing this just to escape, you're going to have a bad time. And if you don't follow my instructions, particularly the multiple backups I'll give you, which trust me, are there for a reason, you're going to have a bad time. The name of this game is The Three Kings, by the way. The ingredients are as follows. You'll need a very large, empty, and quiet room, preferably without windows. If windows exist, you need to be able to cover them and ensure total darkness. Basements usually work well, if they're roomy enough. A pack of candles. You'll only use one if all goes well, and a lighter. A bucket of water and a mug. A fan. 2 large mirrors, like the one on your dresser. Don't worry, they won't be harmed. Or if they are, it'd be the least of your concerns. 3 chairs, an alarm clock, an active cell phone. Don't forget to charge the goddamn battery. A loved one willing to follow rules and go along with all this madness. And a small toy or dear object from your childhood. The setup is simple. Start setup at around 11 p.m. Place 1 chair in the center of the room, facing north. This is important. Place the other 2 chairs exactly to the left and right, facing your throne. The distance between your throne and that of your queen and fool should be about the length of your arm to each side, more or less. Place the 2 large mirrors on the queen and fool chairs left and right of you, facing you and each other. Try your best to have them stand at a 90-degree angle, or else you may get more or less than 3 kings. If you sit on your throne facing straight ahead, north, you should be able to perceive your own reflection in each of the 2 mirrors without actually having to turn your head nor your eyes to do so. If you see your own reflection in the corner of your eye, just barely there, then you've done it right. Place the bucket of water and the mug in front of you, just barely out of reach. Place the fan behind you. Turn it on. Don't set it to maximum power. Medium or low is usually enough. Leave it on. Turn off the lights. Leave the door open, and go to your bedroom. Set the candles by the side of your bed, next to a lighter, your alarm clock, and your cell phone. Leave it charging. Set your alarm clock for 3:30 a.m. Turn off your lights and sleep while holding your power object. Get some rest. Now it's showtime. Wake up at 3:30 a.m. with your alarm clock. Turn it off, but don't turn on the light. You have exactly 3 minutes to light your candle, grab your cell phone, and make your way to the dark room to sit on your throne. You should be seated by 3:33 a.m. Don't forget your power object. Check for potential red flags. If your cell phone didn't charge for whatever reason, abort the mission. If the alarm didn't go off exactly at 3:30 a.m., abort the mission. If you find the dark room door closed, remember you left it open. Abort the mission. If the fan is turned off, you left it on. Abort the mission. Side note, if you have to abort the mission due to any of the above, leave the house with your loved one. Go to a hotel or something. There's no need to run. You have time to grab a jacket and your keys and whatnot. But leave. After 6 a.m., the coast should be clear. If all is going as planned, you can proceed and take your throne. Do not look directly at either of the 2 mirrors beside you. Do not let the candle go out. The fan is behind you. You must protect the candle with your body, which is standing in between. There's a reason for this, as you'll soon see. Look straight ahead at the darkness, not at the candle, not at the mirrors, just straight ahead. Eagle-eyed readers surely noticed I didn't say during the setup which chair was queen and which chair was fool. That's because it's your job to find out, and from their point of view, you are either their queen or their fool, hence 3 kings. I won't spoil what happens next. Suffice to say, you won't be alone, and if you have any questions, you'll get answers. Sometimes in the form of new questions, but hey, that's the story of humanity, eh? Just stay put and try not to move. Again, do not look directly at the mirrors, or the candle. Just straight ahead. Trust me. Don't chicken out either. You need to wait until 4:34. By 4:34, it's all over. It's okay to tremble a little bit. Just try not to. Not because it affects the ritual or anything. It's just a pussy thing to do while in polite company. Did I mention not to let the candle go out? That's what the fan is for. You're protecting the candle with your body. But if your body was to be suddenly moved, then the fan would turn off the candle. That's backup number 1. Your loved one is backup number 2. At 4:34, she has to come in the room and call your name. If that won't work, she has to call your cell phone. If that won't work, she has the glass of water and the bucket. She can't touch you though. That's a newbie mistake. Backup number 3 is your item of power, the toy or locket or whatever object of strength you brought along for the ride. It'll show you the way if shit hits the fan. Multiple backups. You gotta be like a Boy Scout if you do these things. If you half-ass it all the way so that it won't work. Worst you can do is take it seriously enough for it to work and not seriously enough to be prepared for the consequences. If in doubt, refer to the title. My roommate has been in the shower for more than 4 hours. So, I got home at around 11 p.m. Late night at the office turned into an even later night at the bar. About 4 drinks deep at this point, and I'm tired, just about ready to fall asleep as I stumble through the doorway. I lay down on the couch and reach for my bag of joints, and spark went up as I pulled YouTube up on my laptop. I'm in the middle of watching some luxury cruise tour, close to passing out when I hear the front door open. I sit up and turn my head slightly, just enough to see my roommate coming in. He hangs his jacket in the closet and doesn't say anything, and walks slowly to his room, which is normal enough. I'd been living with him for about 3 months, long enough for me to pick up on most of his tendencies. The guy really doesn't talk unless spoken to, which was far from a problem for me. He also generally kept things clean on his end, never causing much in a way of problems. I really couldn't complain. So I got back to watching YouTube, and about 5 minutes later, I hear the shower in his room turning on. Once again, nothing strange. At this point, I'm watching bare knuckle boxing highlights with my eyes half open, maybe 1 or 2 minutes away from passing out. I'm remembering waking up in the darkness, my head hurting, my throat dry as hell. I sat up slowly, waiting for the grogginess to settle into something manageable. Once it did, I grabbed my phone and checked the time. Around 3:30 a.m. from what I remember. I was starving, so I got up, began walking towards the fridge, and then I noticed it. A soft but ever-present noise in the background. It took me a few seconds to really recognize what it was. The shower. Suddenly, the events of last night began replaying in my head. Drinking at the bar, Ubering home, laptop, couch, my roommate coming home, the shower turning on. I stood there for a while, trying to make sense of it. Maybe he went to bed and forgot to turn it off. I shook my head. There's no way that happened, I thought. Maybe he slipped and fell. Realizing the implications of this, I rushed towards his room but found his bathroom door locked. I began pounding on it. "Hey man, are you alright?" No response. I considered kicking the door down but decided to call 911 before I did that. I took my phone out, preparing to dial when I noticed that I had an unread text. One from my roommate. "Hey man, I couldn't sleep so I went over to my girlfriend's place. Not sure when I'll be back. Sent 2 hours ago." I look at the bathroom door, then back down at my phone. Everything about this was wrong. First of all, my roommate barely texts me, and certainly never to tell me when he's going out. Second of all, I know for a fact that he's single and has been for a while. And third of all, who the fuck was in the shower then? I tried calling him. No answer. Sent him some texts, but no response. I walked over to his desk and saw that his keys and wallet were still beside his laptop. My head's starting to spin at this point, and I get out of there, go back into the living room, and then turn on the lights. I'm pacing around in a circle, trying to follow the plot while also trying to ignore the shower, a noise that I could never have imagined of being so dreadful in any context. Sometime later, I hear something vibrating on the kitchen counter. I move towards it and see that it's a phone. My roommate's phone. The panic begins settling in, and I immediately grab my keys and run out of the apartment. I make my way down the hall and take the stairs down to the lobby, but even that doesn't seem far enough away, so I make my way over to the McDonald's across the street. I sit there for a while, considering calling the cops, but for some reason, feeling too nervous to do so. But even though there's hardly anybody in there, the place begins to feel suffocating, and I decide to leave, walking back out onto the empty streets. Almost immediately, I get this feeling that I'm being watched, and I feel my gaze drifting up and towards the apartment. Soon, I'm looking at my balcony, and I see somebody standing there. A dark figure stood completely straight, stiff to the point where it nearly resembles a mannequin. But it isn't one. If I look closely, I can see it just slightly swaying. I froze in place, my mind hardly able to understand or accept what it was seeing. It's not my roommate. It's too tall. In fact, it's too tall to be anybody I know. Its head nearly scraping the bottom of the balcony above. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't make out any of its details. The darkness and distance may have been enough to explain that away, but there was something about it that drove me towards a different conclusion. That this thing simply possessed no details that could have been observed. That the only element of its composition was that of unadulterated darkness. Of course, my gut instinct was to get the hell away from it, but the voice in my head was telling me that if I were to try and run, that this thing would end up following me. I went back into the McDonald's instead, locking myself in the bathroom as I finally dialed 911. I told the operator that somebody had broken into my place, but that I had gotten out of there without them noticing, but that they were still in there. It was the story that most accurately represented the situation without making me come across as batshit. The operator told me that they'd be sending somebody over for me to hang tight. I left the bathroom, waiting at the table closest to the exit until I could see the red and blue lights cutting through the darkness. I went outside to meet the cops, looking up at the balcony to find it empty, though the door to the living room had been left open. They pelted me with a bunch of questions that I found difficult to answer. Is the intruder armed? Do I have an idea about who they might be? What are their intentions? I told them I didn't know, that I couldn't figure it out, but they kept on asking. Soon, I was practically yelling at them to go up there and check it out for themselves, and I suppose the terror in my voice was enough for them to begin taking this seriously. They told me to wait by the entrance, and I watched on as they entered the building. I was out there for a long time, growing increasingly anxious at the thought of what they were going to tell me when they came down. A few minutes later, the silence was being broken by a single muffled gunshot. My heart dropped into my stomach, and I continued to wait there, unsure of what to do otherwise. 20 more minutes of silence, and the other officers still hadn't come down. Soon, I could hear more of them approaching in the distance. Before I knew it, 4 more cop cars had pulled up around me and the scene had fallen into chaos. Officers shouting over each other and into their radios, more questions being hurled my way, none of which I was able to answer. The next few sequences were mostly a blur, but I remember the building being evacuated, the tenants frightened and confused as they were ushered outside while the officers became more and more frantic. I remembered hearing more scattered gunshots, some screaming, other noises that were difficult to make sense of. There were a few lapses in my memory after that, but I recall being pushed into the back of a police car. After being driven to the station, I was led into one of the interrogation rooms, where I found 2 nondescript men in suits waiting for me. They didn't introduce themselves and immediately went into a series of questions, each one more bizarre than the last. What company was your roommate employed by? What was the nature of his job? How many people have been inside your apartment since your roommate moved in? Have you ever heard voices inside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? Voices that did not belong to your roommate? Have you ever seen a circle of people standing outside the apartment from the hours of midnight to 3 a.m.? People that were exceptionally tall. And one of the most unsettling ones. Have you ever seen somebody standing at the foot of your bed upon waking up, between the hours of midnight to 3 a.m., only for them to disappear moments later? If so, do you remember what they looked like? Any distinct features? As they continued probing me, my mind began conjuring up some of the strange shit that had happened after my roommate had moved in. Shit that I'd written off as figments of my imagination, simply because I had no explanation for them. I did hear voices, always coming from the room next to mine where my roommate slept. I was always so tired when I heard them, but I do remember it either sounding like a young woman or man with an extremely deep voice. I could never make out any words. It always sounded like gibberish. And then, there was that one time I went to the bathroom in the middle of the night. Still half asleep, I didn't bother turning the lights on as I entered, but as my eyes began adjusting to the dark, I could have sworn that somebody was already sitting on the toilet. Somebody extremely tall. Of course, when I turned the lights on, nothing was there. It was easy to chalk it up to a product of late night drowsiness at the time, and I had never really thought about it since. After doing my best to give them useful information, the suits spent a good few minutes taking notes on their phone. Once they were done, they sat up quickly, told me that they'd be in touch before leaving the room. A cop came in a few minutes later and told me that since I couldn't return to the apartment, that they would set me up in a nearby hotel until they were able to get the situation under control, and that I should stay put until they gave me a call. "What happened?" I asked him. "What did you guys find up there?" He stared at me for a long time, not as if he were deep in thought, but as if he held deep aversion for what he was considering telling me. Eventually, he just shook his head. "I don't know," he said. I really don't know." I nodded, tried to smile, though I'm sure it didn't come across very well. It's the next day now, and I'm in the hotel. Of course I couldn't sleep. Couldn't really eat. The officer hasn't called me yet. When I try searching up information about the evacuation on the internet, all I can find are articles claiming that it was due to a fire. A fucking fire. Update. I fell asleep and I just woke up. It's 1 a.m. now, and I can hear the shower. Me and my girlfriend Alex moved into an apartment a couple of months ago. It's a small apartment on the outside of a small town, just big enough for us and our cat. On the day we moved in, my brother noticed a crawl space that looked like it'd lead to an attic, but it's an apartment complex and we're on the top floor with no attic. We brushed it off not knowing what it was, but not questioning it. We move in and there were no problems for a week until one night. It was a stormy night. We lay on the couch with our cat curled up on my lap fast asleep. Loud claps of thunder and lightning so bright it lights up the whole room is happening all around us. The rain lightens up, the thunder sounds miles away, and the lightning comes to a stop. Just as we were getting into bed that night, we hear a small knock coming from the other room. We look at each other and we both think it's the cat knocking something over, but he's asleep on the pillows. To not freak us out, we chalk it up to the house settling after the storm we just endured. We go to bed and, in the middle of the night, we both wake up to scratching. Not just cat or animal scratches, but deep and long scratches, followed by a loud bang and things falling. We both jump up. Alex grabs a bat and I get my phone ready to call 911. We both walk out of the room slowly, making sure not to make any noise. We open the door and there's nothing there. We scan the house and don't see anything besides the crawl space. It's all tampered with. We're both uneasy about it now. A month had passed and we'd forgotten about the incident. Nothing else had happened. No noises, no scratches, nothing falling. Alex is leaving for a couple hours to go to a friend's house. She said she'll be back in a couple hours, but it's 9 p.m. I know she's going to be asleep by the time she comes home. I finish doing my nightly routine and turn on some TV in bed. A couple hours pass and I hear a noise outside the room that jolts me awake and things are falling over. Of course she came home drunk again. She'll find her way back into here or pass out on the couch. I start to fade back to sleep when I hear her climb into bed next to me and cuddle up beside me. I promise I won't knock things over anymore. I'm just so clumsy. I'm sorry, she says. I tell her it's okay and we'll clean it up in the morning. She kisses my head and we go to bed. The next morning, I wake up and she's not in bed next to me. Kinda odd cause she's not one to get up right away in the morning. I got out in the living room and she's nowhere to be seen. Weird. I start getting ready for the day and she comes in with flowers and coffee. I tell her thank you and ask what these are for. She says she's sorry she never came home last night. She didn't want to drive home because she'd been drinking. I tell her that's impossible. She laid in bed with me and was talking to me before we went to bed. Who was in my bed last night? My wife is lurking in my childhood photos, but I met her at the age of 30, and she looks no younger in the old pictures. Sometimes, it feels as if my life has been nothing but an ever-revolving door of grief. I'm only 34 years old, and I've lost everyone to death, rejection, or diverging paths. My parents, my sister, my childhood friends, and the countless other loved ones. I feel numb, directionless. Above all else, I feel angry. I hate the world for taking them from me. I hate life for dealing cards from a rotten deck. My mother passed last year. She had been fighting a lengthy battle with dementia since 2019. I didn't cry when she died. I had nothing left in the tank. I'd already endured small, painful pinches of grief over the years. I grieved when she lost a piece of herself. I grieved for every one of us that she forgot, whilst there were still those of us left to forget. Those 4 years fragmented me. Mom and I were so close, and it broke my heart to see her very soul disintegrate. She was my only remaining family. My dad and sister died when I was young, and slowly, everyone else vanished too. I can't explain it, but in spite of her deterioration, I think Mom held on to life for me. "I worry, Brennan," my mother hazily said. "You're safe, Mom," I said. "You don't need to." "No, I worry about Brennan," she interjected in a fluster. "I'm Brennan, Mom, and I'm fine," I said, sighing. "I worry," she absentmindedly whispered. When my mother died in February of 2023, I was left with one person in the entire world, Olivia. I counted my blessings to have a darling wife who would always be by my side, until I realized how terribly true that might be. Whilst I was cleaning out my mother's attic, I found a box of photo albums, dust-coated antiques that I'd never seen before. Too many painful memories, perhaps, but a tinge of warmth spread through my body as I eagerly flicked through the pages. A fuzzy, forgotten feeling. I remembered being happy as a child. I was surrounded by family and friends. I lovingly tore through the pages, and I was moments away from shouting for my wife to come up to the attic. But then, I noticed something bizarre. Olivia was standing in the back of a photo. It was a picture of a day at the zoo with my parents and my sister, through metal bars, at the opposite side of the lion enclosure. I could see my wife standing there. Someone I didn't know as a child, but it was her. There was no doubt about that. Distinctive black hair, fair complexion, and a petite physique. She wore a thin, knowing smile that seemed unbefitting of her, or any version of Olivia that I've seen before. My stomach gurgled nervously, but I smiled and laughed it off. "Uncanny," I whispered to myself. Obviously, it couldn't have been her, I told myself. We're the same age, and she would have been a child at the time. It's just a doppelganger. I carried on flicking through the pages, and then a lump formed at the surface of my throat. My wife appeared again. This time, it was a photo of our family's Christmas gathering in a restaurant. And outside the window, beneath a smoky shelter, a solitary figure stood and watched us. It was Olivia, or a woman who, yet again, looked identical to my 33-year-old wife. Once is nothing. Twice is a coincidence, I muttered uncertainly. I frantically tore through the photo album, as sweat collected in thick icy trails on my colorless cheeks. Olivia was in every photo, and she looked no different from the present day. The same woman, always lurking somewhere in the background, discreetly watching, ever wearing that foul grin. My heart thumped fitfully. This was no longer an oddity, a funny peculiarity. It was unsettling enough to see evidence of a person stalking my family, but a person who hadn't aged in 33 years? It was sinister. It defied everything my logical brain knew to be true. I found myself trembling in terror and clawing at my hair. I had stopped turning pages. After seeing my wife skulking in dozens of pictures, I hadn't the stomach to continue, but I couldn't tear my eyes off the page before me. It was a picture captioned, "Yummy Cake, Brennan's 10th birthday party." I was still sitting in the back garden on an overcast day. A decadent chocolate cake sat on my lap. My jubilant friends and family surrounded me. I was midway through blowing out 10 candles, and the flames leaned away from my pursed lips. There she was again, hiding in a photo from the year 2000. Olivia would have been 10 years old, just like me, and yet the camera told another tale. This time, my fully grown wife cowered behind the short fence at the rear of our property, but the top of her head peered into our garden, and I could distinguish her distinctive black hair. Her eyes were bloodshot and thirsty. She was, perhaps most hauntingly, eyeing the camera. It felt as if she could see me in the attic. "You're losing your mind, Brennan. This isn't real. It's all in your..." A sudden wisp of wind extinguished the attic light. My body shivered uncontrollably, and I found myself wrestling with an undeniable thought. It sounded like lips blowing air. Trying to steady my breathing, I anxiously patted the floor of the blackened attic. I wish I wouldn't leave my phone in stupid places, I thought. I wanted to leave, but I didn't trust myself to maneuver through my mother's cluttered attic in the dark. And then my fingers brushed over a familiar smooth surface. "Gotcha," I thought, before picking up my phone and turning on the flashlight. I screamed. The birthday photo had changed. The candles on my cake were gone, and I was sitting alone. No family, no friends, nobody, not even Olivia. I stumbled to my feet and dropped the book. The floorboards moaned as I shifted my weight backwards. I had to get far from that cursed book, that cursed attic. I twisted to run for the attic door, but I didn't move beyond that first step. My torchlight illuminated something horrifying. Poking her head through the attic opening, Olivia smiled at me. Her eyes mirrored those in the numerous photographs I had just seen. Her pupils seemed darker, wider. Red veins painted the corners, and her eyes rippled ever so slightly as if they were not really eyes at all. I don't know what happened to the woman I married, but that wasn't who eyed me from the attic door. She was a horror, some rabid mouse that had soundlessly slithered up the stairs and the ladder. My wife giggled. "I'll eat you from the inside out." And then the woman plummeted through the attic door, disappearing from sight. Thinking only of escaping, I lunged for the open door, but something seized my ankle, chaining me to the attic. I spun to face my shackle, and my mouth parted in wordless terror. From the open page of the photo album, Olivia's twisted arm and face had emerged. She offered a toothy grin and unhinged eyes as she attempted to pull me into the picture. Vile bile, so rich. With our consummation, it becomes complete. I cried in agony as I was dragged to hell by the thing I had loved for 3 years. A hellish demon I had believed to be my wife. But it seemed that I truly had no one left. Nothing but a cancerous tumor clinging to my very essence. It was draining the last of my pain, the last of my suffering. I closed my eyes and thought of my loved ones, the loved ones I was certain I would shortly see again. As the terrifying demonic limb pulled my leg into the photo album, I prepared to meet whatever fate awaited. All of that anger, the years spent in a perpetual psychological nightmare, for nothing. I visualized my mother's smiling face, and a calmness swept through my mind. "I worry about Brennan," she said. I started to fib before deciding to unburden the weight on my chest. "No, I'm not fine, Mom, but I will be." Suddenly, the hissing ceased. All sound ceased, and when I opened my eyes, my wretched wife was gone. My ankle was no longer merging with the laminated plastic, but it throbbed painfully. The bottom of my trouser leg bore claw-shaped tears, and it was stained with fresh blood. To be certain that the entity had vanished, I cast my phone light onto the book, and the picture of my 10th birthday had returned to normal. I wasn't alone. I was surrounded by friends and family. Nothing could destroy that memory in my mind, but I shuddered as I turned the pages of the book. My smiling wife is still lurking in the photographs. I fled the house and I haven't looked back. It's been a year, and I don't fear the memories anymore. I'm moving forward. I'm learning to love again. I'm learning to open myself to new people and new memories, but I still fear loss. After all, that horrifying woman waits for me. I know she does. I fear the day that I notice her in a new photo. guess there comes a time in most people's lives when they are overwhelmed with a sense of nostalgia and seek to reclaim their youth in some way or another. That time came for me when I was in high school. I guess I need to elaborate a bit on this because that seems like an awfully young age for such sentiments. You see, I was a sickly child. I spent a long time confined to a hospital bed, watching other children play their games. In all honesty, I was a little jealous that I never had that experience, so I guess that's why I tried to capture that ephemeral nostalgia one night with my friends. I want to say we were all sophomores or juniors in high school at the time. I had a fairly tight-knit group of friends. We did almost everything together. We hung out, studied, and even experimented a bit with each other. I think it was that unity and bond that gave me the courage to even propose my childish idea. We were hanging out in the depths of my old neighborhood. That was the ideal place for teenagers like us because a construction company was building a series of houses to try to sell to new families at an inflated price. They were early in their construction, so the houses were bare bones built and lacked any of the real accommodations essential for any typical house. This was the perfect hideout to drink, smoke, and generally get up to no good. The construction company put large keypad locks on the doors, but most hadn't even been locked up properly, so sneaking in was a simple task. Like I said, we were hanging out in one of these soon-to-be neighborhoods one night. We were passing a joint between all of us and trying to wax philosophical. Joining me on this outing were 3 of my close friends. It was my best friend Brian, Sarah, Casey, the girl I had a crush on, and me. We tried to talk intelligently, but looking back, her ideas were anything but sophisticated. Sarah was complaining that there wasn't anything to do out here, and it was then that I decided to take the risk and suggest we play hide and seek. They balked at my childish idea, but the addition of a few simple rules spiced things up enough. I set the rules as follows. Everyone seeks and one person hides. The first person to find the hider gets to ask them 3 questions. The last person to find the hider has to answer 3 personal questions. We would all draw lots with matches and separate so the others could hide in secrecy. The person with the already lit and extinguished match would be the hider. I, of course, was being duplicitous and made sure Casey drew the dud match. I wanted the opportunity to have some alone time with her and get to know her better. I think I did it that way to hide my childish infatuation with her, but I was fearful of being called out on it. They were hesitant at first, but their reluctance melted away after we finished up the joint. I put the matches in my hand, with the one extinguished one pointed out at Casey. We drew and split apart with the intention of beginning the game after 5 minutes, giving the hider sufficient time to choose to hide in one of the 3 partially constructed houses on the block. It was late, but we weren't in any hurry to get home. We had a system where we called our parents and told them we were staying out with a different friend, and then would meet up to hang out and get into teenage shenanigans. We all discreetly looked at our lots. I was a seeker, and I assumed Casey was the one who had to hide. We all split apart so we wouldn't know where the hider was going, but I had a pretty good idea. When we arrived at the under construction neighborhood, Casey had taken a liking to the last house on the lane. I mentioned that I knew it was unlocked and we would probably explore it later. We never did find the time to do that, so I knew she would probably feel drawn to check out the house while looking for a hiding spot. I waited 5 minutes before heading to the last house on the lane. The keypad lock hadn't been engaged, which made opening the door simple. I was lucky that the moon was so bright that night and illuminated my way, otherwise I would have tripped walking up to the house. The construction company hadn't even put in street lights yet, and it gave the small neighborhood an eerie feeling to it. I opened the door and stared into the obsidian abyss that yawned before me. I won't lie, the dark did put me on edge, but my desire to get closer to Casey drove me forward. I walked around the kitchen, but found no one there. My shoes thudded on the floor that hadn't even had carpet laid out yet. I searched the first floor, but had no luck. I was beginning to wonder if I could ever find her in this darkness, The windows had been set, but were covered in particle board to prevent animals from sneaking in and setting up residence. I went upstairs with my hand running along the wall to steady myself since there wasn't even a banister built in yet. I remember thinking to myself that this house was a death trap, with its exposed wiring, lack of banisters, and sheets of plywood lying around. The master bedroom was empty, but just as I was about to give up hope on finding her, I heard the floor creak as someone moved around in the room next to the bedroom. I followed the sound, and as I strained my eyes in the darkness, I could see someone sitting in the middle of the unfurnished room. My heart started to beat in a rapid staccato. I had found her. I sat down a few feet away and loudly proclaimed, "I found you, so I get to ask 3 questions." She started at the sound of my voice, but seemed to calm down as I continued talking. I was so eager, and looking back, I also realized how stupid I was being. You know what people say, hormones are the strongest mind-altering drug on the planet. There was only one way to make sure it was Casey and not Sarah. I asked, "Have you ever had sex?" There was a pause that I chalked up to a little bit of embarrassment. I asked this question because I knew from talking to Brian that Sarah was not a virgin, and I knew that Casey was from a drunken late-night conversation with Sarah in which she revealed a lot more than she should have about her friends. She answered, "No." Now I was certain that I was talking to Casey and not Sarah. The voice gave away that much. To be completely honest, my bravado had driven me this forward, but couldn't carry me past the next threshold. Truthfully, I'm glad I chickened out of my next question. My next question was going to be, "Do you want to have sex?" Once again, hormones. I didn't ask that boorish question. In fact, in that moment, my mind completely blanked, and all I could think of was Casey's sun-kissed hair, or the way her smile sent a spark through me, and made my heart beat so fast that I was worried it was about to burst through my chest. We sat there in silence for a few moments, as I tried to think of something to say to her. I kicked myself mentally, worrying that I was going to appear awkward to her. I would only get this one opportunity to impress her, and if I blew it, any chance I had with her would be ruined. I finally managed to choke out, "I'm sorry, I don't know what to..." I was interrupted by her slowly sliding across the floor until we were just inches away. If I thought my heart was beating fast when I first saw her, now it was a jackhammer in my chest. She wanted to get closer to me. Was she attracted to me? Did she feel the same way I felt? Her action practically stole the words right out of my mouth. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't think straight. I became aware of a sound that was quiet at first, but had grown as she gotten closer to me. It was the sound of her breathing. Her breath came out in quick, shallow puffs, like she had just finished running a lap around the neighborhood. It almost sounded sexual. Then again, to my mind back then, almost any stimuli could have been perceived as being sexual in nature. Goddamn hormones. I wasn't sure what was going on, but I don't think I really cared. I decided to make a move. I slid my hand from off my lap and moved it to hers. I wrapped my hands around hers and held it. It was warm to the touch, a little bit sweaty, but I'm sure my hands were no better. Her breathing hitched as soon as my hand touched hers. My heart practically exploded out of my chest and rocketed through the heavens in that moment. At that time, I considered this one of the most romantic gestures I had experienced up to this point in my life. Holding hands in the darkness, listening to the sounds of our breathing intermingled. I decided to go for it. I slowly leaned into the darkness where I could see her form. I was going to kiss her, the girl I had pined for almost 2 years. Her breath smelled sickly sweet, kind of like really sugary honey. I mentally wondered what mine smelled like. I silently prayed that it didn't smell gross. She picked up my oh-so-subtle signal and leaned forward to kiss me. Our lips were inches away, and I was seconds away from nirvana when Sarah trumped into the room. I mentally rattled off a series of curses and invectives that would have made a sailor blush. She said, "What are you guys doing? I found Brian like 15 minutes ago." That set off a klaxon of alarm bells in my head, but I couldn't figure out why at the time. Sarah shifted her weight, and although I couldn't see it in the darkness, I was sure she had just raised her eyebrow. "What have you two been getting into while we were playing your kids' game? I understand, but don't make us jump through hoops and send me off tromping around in the dark looking for Brian while you two canoodle." I asked, dumbfounded. Brian was the one hiding? Sarah nodded in answer. "He was sitting out behind a house. He's horrible at hiding. We got bored and decided to look for you two." Something wasn't right. I had found Casey sitting in this room. If she wasn't the hider, why was she sitting up here by herself? I started to feel a cold sweat forming on my skin. Something was definitely wrong here. Brian was the final straw. He stepped into the darkness and I recognized his voice. He had a way of talking that made anything he said come out in a resounding and booming tone. His voice reverberated. "Did you find him, Sarah?" "I found Casey." His voice died out as I finally managed to voice the second question that I should have asked at the very beginning. Do I know you?" The voice softly replied, "No." But the word was so pregnant with emotions that a shiver rattled through my body. Casey wasn't in the room with us. She was outside the house. Whose hand was I holding? With my free hand, I reached into my pocket and pulled out the matches we used for drawing lots. It felt like my lungs were in a vice. I couldn't breathe. I dragged the match along the floor and ignited it. The little flame was sufficient to illuminate the form beside me. Sarah shrieked and Brian practically threw himself out of the room in fright. I jerked my hand free and accidentally extinguished the light after our short, terror-filled look at the thing. In later conversations I had with Brian and Sarah, it seemed like we all saw something different in that transitory moment. Sarah swore that she saw a malformed woman that was reminiscent of thalidomide children with bent, twisted limbs and fused fingers. Brian saw an ancient and decrepit woman with pendulous breasts and molted graying skin. What I saw gave me nightmares for weeks afterwards. I saw what looked like a woman. Her jaw was twisted open, like it had been dislocated. It was open so wide that it looked like she could fit my entire head into her cavernous maw. I'm not sure if it was like that in preparation for our kiss or what. Her fingers had extra joints and seemed unnaturally long and bony. She was gaunt, pale, and her mangy hair hung around her head like a bird's nest made out of dead twigs. We all fled the house. In my attempt to escape, I ran into the doorframe and gave myself such a terrible bruise that I had to spend the next day icing it and wondering if I'd broken my collarbone. We flew from that house like banshees from hell. Casey didn't believe our story, but to be honest, I didn't care if she believed us or not. I know what I saw, and what I saw horrified me. Years have passed since then. I graduated, settled down with a nice girl. Casey and I drifted apart in the later years of high school, and moved into a nice house. The story drifted to the back of my mind, and was washed away in the ebb and flow of day-to-day life. These memories re-emerged at the forefront of my mind like a raging tidal wave by the simplest of things. A power outage. My power had just gone out. I sighed at the inconvenience of it all and went down to the basement to check the circuit breaker. This was a common enough occurrence due to the faulty wiring of my house that I could find the circuit breaker and flip it with my eyes closed. I didn't even need a flashlight anymore. The motion was so ingrained in my muscle memory. It was there, as I fiddled with the circuit, that I became aware of a sound. It was almost inaudible, but it steadily grew as I paused to listen to it. I couldn't identify it at first, but when I finally placed it, the memories flooded back to me. Sitting in the darkness, my hands entwined with that thing's hand, and my mouth inches away from hers in preparation to kiss her pale skin. It was a sound of breathing other than my own, and it sounded shallow and forced, like someone enervated. I would have smiled if I wasn't so scared. It almost sounded sexual. The voice spoke, and my stomach almost bottomed out from dropping to its pit so quickly. "You have one more question to ask me." In my basement, I realized that I was no longer the shy boy I was in the dark of that partially constructed house all those years ago. I had found my voice, and I didn't need to think of the words to say. I asked my final question, already knowing the answer. Am I going to leave this basement? I woke up again last night after hearing the same haunting noise that has plagued me since my childhood. This time, however, is the first time I'd heard it during my adult life. When I was younger, I called the noise sideways static, but now I don't give it a name, as I'm trying to forget that it exists. When I was 6 or so, my family was killed in a fatal car accident. I was the only survivor. My only memory of the incident is seeing some men in uniforms rescue me from that abhorrent mess, which was once my family car. The weird thing that always haunted me about the incident was that the men who rescued me were not cops or paramedics. Instead, these men were more like a secret government unit of some kind. However, I always just figured that it was just my childish imagination, making wild ideas about being rescued by secret agents, which was always a childhood interest of mine. The other weird thing about it is hearing the sideways static noise for the first time. It was distant, but there. It has been following me off and on ever since. Since my parents died, I stayed with my grandmother until she passed away when I was about 20. She left me her house and all of her other possessions, seeing that neither of us had anyone left. I lived a normal adolescence, suburban life for the most part, except for one thing. Every 3 or 4 years, I would hear a faint sound outside of my house, like a man crawling or walking slowly outside my window. And then a faint sound eerily like static. I felt it was almost saying something to me, but I couldn't tell what. I told my grandmother, but she, and I too after a while, took it as childish nonsense. We lived together throughout the rest of her days in peace, with little other disturbances in our lives. Today, I had a visitor come to my door who nearly shocked me to death. It was a man wearing the secret agent suit, the same secret agent suit from the night my parents died. He told me that he'd been watching for a while and that it was time for us to leave. I felt myself unable to resist. Before we left, I set up a few cameras in my room, garage, and kitchen. After staying in the hotel for a night, he explained to me that his organization has been watching me for a long time. He and his comrades were part of an organization that watched out for children who lost their parents. He also told me about a creature who had crossed from another dimension of space-time to try to capture me for causing something that altered the timelines of both my world and its own. He then explained that it had crossed over many times, but wouldn't take me because I was under my grandmother's care. But now that she has passed, I'm free for him to capture. After returning home, I immediately checked the cameras to see if the creature had made it into my house. What I heard and saw on the cameras scared the life out of me. The The video recorded the static noises getting louder and louder until I heard a voice in the static say, "I killed them. I killed my family. Mother, father, I'm sorry. I will catch him. I will make him pay for what we have done." The voice almost sounded like a normal person, except it was paired with a darker, raspier voice. All of a sudden, my doors busted off the hinges. A man with half of his face ripped off crawled into my house and began to beat loudly on the floor. He tore at his flesh and shattered in pain as he ran through my house, looking for the person who destroyed his life. I continued to watch as the mangled body walked through my kitchen, fall to the ground, crying, sobbing, and shouting out the words again and again. In a strange way, I felt a frightening connection between myself and the creature. It was like seeing someone after years of last meeting. I felt a profound sadness and fear as I watched the wretched being crawl around and sob as if everything it loved was destroyed in front of it. The static was unbearably loud as the creature writhed on the floor in a horrifying manner. After nearly 20 minutes of this, a few secret agent men broke in through my front door and caught the body and put it in a body bag and carried it outside. My secret agent guardian was standing at my doorway when I walked out of my room. I look at him in horror and in desperate need for answers. The only words I managed to utter was, "What was that?" "You," he said. I couldn't believe it. I felt connection with the sad soul because it was me. I was angry at myself for killing my parents all those years ago. It was then when I realized that my guardian agent was actually my guardian angel, who saved me after I caused my parents to die. My parents died because instead of paying attention to the road, they were trying to soothe their 6-year-old son with a bellyache. This led them to skid off the road and wrap the telephone pole like a Christmas present. I began to recall the images of the wreck, the car on fire, my parents dying slowly from the heat, and the bright lights of someone approaching to grab me out of the flaming car. My guilt was unbearable after hearing this. I felt the whole world turn upside down as deafening static blocked all of my senses. I felt myself ripping at my skin and hair, but I felt no pain. I began to uncontrollably move my lips in words that were seared into my mind. I killed them. Have you ever forgotten your phone? When did you realize you'd forgotten it? I'm guessing you didn't just smack your forehead and exclaim, "Damn," apropos of nothing. The realization probably didn't dawn on you spontaneously. More likely, you reached for your phone, pawing open your pocket or handbag, and were momentarily confused by it not being there. Then you did a mental restep of this morning's events. Shit. In my case, my phone's alarm woke me up as normal, but I realized the battery was lower than I expected. It was a new phone, and it had this annoying habit of leaving applications running that drained the battery overnight. So I put it on the charge while I showered, instead of into my bag like normal. It was a momentary slip from my routine, but that was all it took. Once in the shower, my brain got back into the routine it follows every morning, and then that was that. Forgotten. This wasn't just me being clumsy. As I later researched, this is a recognized brain function. Your brain doesn't just work on one level, it works on many. Like, when you're walking somewhere, you think about your destination and avoiding hazards. But you don't need to think about keeping your legs moving properly. If you did, the entire world would turn into one massive hilarious Quap cosplay. I wasn't thinking about regulating my breathing. I was thinking whether I should grab a coffee on the drive to work. I did. I wasn't thinking about moving my breakfast through my intestines. I was wondering whether I'd finish on time to pick up my daughter Emily from nursery after work or get stuck with another late fee. This is the thing. There's a level of our brain that just deals with routine, so the rest of our brain can think about other things. Think about it. Think about your last commute. What do you really actually remember? Little, if anything, probably. Most common journeys blur into one, and recalling any one in particular is scientifically proven to be difficult. Do something often enough, and it becomes routine. Keep doing it, and it stops being processed by the thinking bit of the brain and gets relegated to a part of the brain dedicated to dealing with routine. Your brain keeps doing it, without you thinking about it. Soon, you think about your route to work as much as you do keeping your legs moving when you walk, as in, not at all. Most people call it autopilot, but there's danger in there. If you have a break in your routine, your ability to remember and account for the break is only as good as your ability to stop your brain going into routine mode. My ability to remember my phone being on the counter is only as reliable as my ability to stop my brain entering morning routine mode, which would dictate that my phone is actually in my bag. But I didn't stop my brain entering routine mode. I got in the shower as normal. Routine started. Exception forgotten. Autopilot engaged. My brain was back in routine. I showered, I shaved. The radio forecast amazing weather. I gave Emily her breakfast and loaded her into the car. She was so adorable that morning. She complained about the bad sun in the morning blinding her, saying it stopped her from having a little sleep on the way to the nursery, and left. That was the routine. It didn't matter that my phone was on the counter, charging silently. My brain was in the routine, and in the routine, my phone was in the bag. This is why I forgot my phone. Not clumsiness, not negligence, nothing more than my brain entering routine mode and overriding the exception. Autopilot engaged. I left for work. It's a swelteringly hot day already. The bad sun had been burning since before my notoriously absent phone woke me. The steering wheel was burning hot to the touch when I sat down. I think I heard Emily shift over behind my driver's seat to get out of the glare. But I got to work, submitted the report, attended the morning meeting. It's not until I took a quick coffee break and reached for my phone that the illusion shattered. I did a mental restep. I remembered the dying battery. I remembered putting it on charge. I remembered leaving it there. My phone was on the counter. Autopilot disengaged. Again, therein lies the danger. Until you have that moment, the moment you reach for your phone and shatter the illusion, that part of the brain is still in routine mode. It has no reason to question the facts of the routine. That's why it's a routine, attrition of repetition. It's not as if someone could say, "Why didn't you remember your phone? Didn't it occur to you? How could you forget? You must be negligent." This is to miss the point. My brain was telling me the routine was completed as normal, despite the fact that it wasn't. It wasn't that I forgot my phone. According to my brain, according to the routine, my phone was in the bag. Why would I think to question it? Why would I check? Why would I suddenly remember, out of nowhere, that my phone was on the counter? My brain was wired into the routine, and the routine was that my phone was in my bag. The day continued to bake. The morning haze gave way to the relentless fever heat of the afternoon. Tarmac bubbled. The direct beams of heat threatened to crack the pavement. People swapped coffees for iced smoothies. Jackets discarded, sleeves rolled up, ties loosened, brows mopped. The park slowly filled with sunbathers and barbecues. Window frames threatened to warp. The thermometer continued to swell. Thank fuck the offices were air-conditioned. But, as ever, the furnace of the day gave way to a cooler evening. Another day, another dollar. Still cursing myself for forgetting my phone, I drove home. The day's heat had baked the inside of the car, releasing a horrible smell from somewhere. When I arrived at the doorway, the stones crunching comfortingly under my tires, my wife greeted me at the door. "Where's Emily?" Fuck. As if the phone wasn't bad enough. After everything, I'd left Emily at the fucking nursery after all. I immediately sped back to the nursery. I got to the door and started practicing my excuses, wondering vainly if I could charm my way out of a late fee. I saw a piece of paper stuck to the door. "Due to vandalism overnight, please use side door, today only." Overnight? What? The door was fine this morning. I froze. My knees shook. Vandals. A change in the routine. My phone was on the counter. I hadn't been here this morning. My phone was on the counter. I'd driven past because I was drinking my coffee. I'd not dropped Emily off. My phone was on the counter. She moved her seat. I hadn't seen her in the mirror. My phone was on the counter. She'd fallen asleep out of the bad sun. She didn't speak when I drove past her nursery. My phone was on the counter. She'd changed the routine. My phone was on the counter. She'd changed the routine, and I'd forgotten to drop her off. My phone was on the counter. 9 hours. That car. That baking sun. No air. No water. No power. No help. That heat. A steering wheel too hot to touch. That smell. I walked to the car door. Numb. Shock. I opened the door. My phone was on the counter. My daughter was dead. Autopilot disengaged.
The following document is from a journal found in an abandoned mental facility. Please note that the probability that any of this is real is very low, and most likely the result of the patient's broken mind. I doubt anyone will believe me. I doubt any of you who might have stumbled upon this will even care afterwards. This is my story. I'm writing this down because somehow that thing got in here. I don't know how much time I have. Maybe an hour. Maybe a few seconds before it breaks the door down. It all started the day I bought my first house. I had lived in apartments and flats, but never owned a place of my own. It was a small wooden brick house, and only had 3 rooms and a basement, along with a window and door connecting all the rooms. I was surprised at how low the price was. Apparently, the couple that lived before me just wanted to get the property sold as soon as possible so they could buy their dream house. But that's not the point. When I first arrived, I felt the keys in my hands, cool and smooth. I was teeming with excitement. I slowly slid the key into the keyhole, almost dropping them several times before finally managing to contain myself enough to open the door. The moment the door swung open, I gasped. The floors were a white carpet, with a small corner of stone flooring for a kitchen. There was an old rotary phone on the wall, and an old black couch. It even had a small island in the middle. That's when I noticed it, just left behind. It was a small porcelain rabbit, covered in cracks. Curious, I picked it up, turning it with my hand. It was hollow and smooth, with small pieces of porcelain crackling off my hand. I gagged. The figure smelled like something dead. Disgusted, I threw it in the trash, and went on moving what little I had into the little house. Later that night, I had prepared my water mattress, and had just gotten into bed. That's when I heard it. echoing like something in the back of my mind. "Look out the window. I'm coming near." I gasped and gently looked out my window. Nothing. I brushed it off as my brain trying to scare me and laid back down in bed. Then it happened again. "Reach out for the telephone. Tell me, what do you hear?" My eyes jutted open hesitantly. I walked to the living room, reaching slowly towards an old rotary phone, reaching it towards my ear. "Hello?" I said. Then I heard it. Its voice was raspy and loud enough to hurt my ears, even though the voice sounded like a whisper. "I'm at the door. Let me in. I'm at the door. Let me in. I'm at the door. Let me in." The message repeated, again and again, piercing through my ears, through my mind, through my very soul. I no longer had any control of my body, but I could feel myself reaching for the door, the handle creaking down as I pushed the door open, dreading what lay on the other side. I was not prepared for what I saw. It looked like a man, but he had shining clear white skin, riddled with cracks. His eyes were like two large holes in his face, and his mouth was pushed out like a snout, filled with sharp teeth, save for two buck teeth in the center, smiling uncontrollably. It had two long, almost rods sticking out of the top of its head. Suddenly, my vision was black, and I couldn't see anything except for a little girl staring at me, talking in a clear voice. Alice was beginning to get very tired of sitting by her sister on the bank, and of having nothing to do. Once or twice, she had peeped into the book that her sister was reading, but it had no pictures or conversations in it. And what is the use of a book, thought Alice, without pictures or conversation? She continued talking as I watched on in horror. The more she said, the more she rotted away, as if every word took another year of her life away. I tried to turn away, but found myself unable to. She slowly turned to an old woman, and then she started to decompose, her voice slowly being drowned out by the sound of flies. I gagged. It all felt so real. I could smell the rot. I could feel the breath coming out of my chest as I watched on in fear. Suddenly, it all went quiet, and everything went black again, until I heard the girl's voice again. Only now, it was old, lisped, like the voice of an old woman. "Wake up." Suddenly, my vision was blocked out for a split second by a bloody skull, its eyes still hanging loosely in its sockets, its mouth wide open like it was laughing. Suddenly I jolted awake, breathing heavily. Was it all a dream? No, it couldn't have been. I was still lying on the floor, in front of the still open door, letting the cool winter air in. That's why I checked myself into the hospital. I told them everything. I told them about the rabbit, about the man, about the girl. I spent the next year in a padded room, completely separated from the rest of the world. I had a total of 3 nurses, but 2 of them quickly became patients. Strangely, they had checked themselves in as well, saying they had also seen the rabbit. Slowly, the hospital's funding started to dry up. The food became cheaper. The water became scarce. My nurse, Rebecca, felt it necessary to let me know that the hospital was probably going to close by the end of the year. She was wrong. It shut down, crumbled around me in just a night. The head doctor, Dr. Pentalagus, made an announcement over the speaker. His voice sounded strange, like he wasn't the one saying the words coming out of his mouth. "Attention all staff and patients. We have a very special announcement for today. I could hear the sound of a record being set up and the clicking of a button. Then, the music started playing. It all happened within seconds. Run, rabbit. Run, rabbit. The screams filling the halls. Run, run, run. The blood seeping under the door. Bang, bang, bang. Bang goes the farmer's gun. The relentless pounding on the door, never stopping until the door finally snaps. It's too late for me. I can feel it staring at me. Its pitch black eyes staring at me from the back. I think I can hear it breathing. Its breath flowing slowly down my neck. But I won't dare to turn around. Please, if you are reading this, it's far too late for me. Save yourself. I don't know where it could appear next. I don't know who it could be after. And I don't know what it wants. All I know is that it will not stop until it gets what it wants. End of note. Along with the note, a record player with the record of Run Rabbit by Flanagan and Allen, along with an old porcelain rabbit figure, was discovered in the abandoned facility.
I've been lying in my bed for hours now. It's 5:35 a.m. and there's not much I can do. You know what the worst part about my situation is? I'm in the same room with my parents. They keep looking at me, and I can't help but look back and try not to cry or scream. Their eyes are focused on me, and their mouths are wide open. There's the strong scent of blood, and I feel so paralyzed with fear. Here's the thing. The second I make any hint that I'm not asleep anymore, I'm completely fucked. I will die, and there's nobody around to save me. I've been trying to think of a way out, but the only idea I have is to rush to the door and run outside the front door and scream for help, hoping any neighbors hear me. It's risky, but if I stay here, I'll surely die. He's waiting for me to wake up and see his masterpiece. You're probably wondering what's going on. I do get ahead of myself sometimes. About 3 hours ago, I heard screaming from the other side of the house. I got up and went to check on the noise before realizing I had to use the bathroom. Instead of doing the smart thing and investigating, I used the bathroom first. I could have gotten myself killed right then for my stupid actions, but I actually did my business and took a peek outside the bathroom. There was blood on the carpet. I got very worried and ran back to my room, hiding under the sheets like the coward I was. I tried to convince myself to go back to sleep, that it was just some really vivid dream or something. I heard my bedroom door open, and like the terrified child that I was, I peeked from under the blankets to see what was going on. I could see something dragging my dead parents into the room. It was not human. I could tell you that. It was hairless, with no eyes and no clothing. It walked like a caveman with its back slouched as it dragged my parents. But this thing was much smarter than any caveman. It was aware of what it was doing. It propped my dad up on the edge of my bed and made him face me. It then sat my mother down in the chair and positioned her towards me as well. It then started rubbing its hands upon the wall, staining them with blood, and then drew a circle with the devil's pentagram in it. This thing had made what it would probably call a masterpiece, and to finish it off, it scribbled a message onto the wall that I could not read in the darkness. It then positioned itself under my bed, waiting to strike. The scariest thing is now my eyes have adjusted to the darkness since then, and I can read the message on the wall. I don't want to look at it because it's terrifying to think about, but I feel I need to see before I'm killed. I peek at the creature's masterpiece. I know you're awake. So just a couple of moments ago, I came across a thread in the forum asking the reader if they've had any paranormal or creepy things happen to them. Well, it got me thinking about this one time I was evacuated from my childhood town. I must have been 7 at the time, and I can somewhat remember the events clearly, even if most of it's pretty hard to recall. Since all of you guys are looking for a good spook, I'll give it a shot and tell the tale. So in my childhood town, I had a good friend named Finny. Finny and I were really close, almost like brothers. I was an only child growing up, and I hung out with Finny almost every day if memory serves. My childhood memories were so precious, and the town itself was so peaceful and benevolent. The town was surrounded by woods, and it even had its own police station and town hall. Everything was picture perfect. Everything was fine until there was a month of rain. When I say a month of rain, I literally mean it. It would never stop raining. It rained that whole month, non-stop, and it was kind of strange since the rain came in unannounced by meteorologists. It was almost similar to that of a hurricane, with strong winds, thunder, lightning, and lengthy periods of rain. It almost came out of nowhere. It just started pouring. The sky went dim and gloomy, the clouds rolled in, the rain fell and it continued for as long as I could remember. Eventually, the ponds, canals, and rivers would start rising due to the heavy rain. The flooding all took place within the first 2 weeks. I remember this one night when it was thundering. I was looking outside my window. I noticed that the lighting had strange colors. Some would look orange, others would look green, and some even purple. This made the rain fall even harder. Eventually, the waters had gotten so high that it reached up to our ankles. We would still go to school since they thought the floods weren't too big a deal. They made us wear raincoats, boots, and also made us take umbrellas with us every day. We all took notice that there was an outbreak of insomnia among us children at the time ever since the rain started. I found it hard to sleep as well. It was one of the many reasons I looked at the lightning at night. We all felt so drawn to the rain and found it strangely soothing and calming. The lights continued in the sky every night until eventually there was the loudest thunderstrike. At least, I thought it was. I bet it woke the whole town up. It struck somewhere within the woods, and then things got weird. Every night, we'd hear weird noises, voices, whispers, and scratching outside. Sinkholes or burrows could be found all over patios, lawns, gardens, and the woods. The water rose up to our waist, and eventually, school was called off on occasion. My friend Finny and some other kids in our clique would visit my house often to play. Sometimes, they might even stay the night. I remember this one time, waking up at night and being drawn to the window. We were in our living room, and my other friend Bryce was looking outside the window I felt enticed to look out of when I was awoke. He and 2 other kids were at the window looking outside as if intrigued. They said that someone was calling out to them and inviting them out to play inside the rain. We looked outside and saw nothing. A few minutes passed as we continued to look out the window, feeling strangely enticed to go outside. Eventually, the rain hit harder, and it also appeared that something was swimming in my flooded backyard. It never emerged from the water to show us its identity or what it was. We just assumed it was the rain making weird patterns in the water as it hit it. The urge to go outside remained, and we began hearing whispers again. They usually ranged from, "Come outside, it's safe," or "Come play with us." Most of what someone would say to convince a child to come out of a hiding spot. My dad came home, and we pretended to sleep since it was way past our bedtimes. My dad was a police officer and was working hard lately, but my friends and I didn't know why. I remember my dad walking in and speaking to my mother. He said that kids were disappearing one by one. They've had no luck catching the kidnapper, and that the abductions were taking place much more frequently. It was true. Walter, Lee, Jennifer, and many others didn't show up at school or any type of meeting place we would visit. I remember his face being so discouraged and worried, almost sickened. I remember my mom and dad's conversation as my friends and I lied awake listening to every detail. We couldn't find a single trace. Some were even taken from home, and there were no signs of forced entry, he said. And my mother sat next to him, trying to comfort him. Other conversations went on, but nothing too relevant to what was happening at the time, and they eventually went to bed. However, before they did, they made sure to lock all doors and close all curtains. My friends and I stayed up, talking about what we just heard, and made up our own little ideas of what was happening, but all too childish. From time to time, the whispers would return to wake us up. Sometimes it was even scratching or clawing at all our walls and windows. We wouldn't dare to open the curtains and see what it was for ourselves. Who could blame us? I mean, there was a madman that kidnapped children on the loose. These events went on for weeks, and the kidnappings only got worse. Houses were found empty in the morning, and sometimes kids would be left behind, too traumatized to speak, and alone in the house with, again, no signs of forced entry. The town was mortified, and eventually, a town meeting was called. Some of my friends were missing too, and all that was left of my clique was Finney and Dalton. We waited outside the courthouse with my mom as it went on. I remember asking about what they were talking about, but my mom would always avoid telling me, usually by saying, "Some very boring stuff grown-ups talk about, dear," or "You're too young, you wouldn't understand, plus you'd probably fall asleep. It's pretty long, honey." I remember the night before the evacuation, exactly one day before the month finished. I lived next door to Dalton, and it was the night I saw him leave. The lights didn't even go on. They sort of just went out of the house, leaving everything behind. They didn't bother to lock the door. They didn't bother to pack, and they didn't bother to change clothing. They left their front door, and they walked into the woods. I was assuming they were taking a shortcut, but I still found it pretty strange. It was drizzling a bit as they left, and the rain was beginning to die down. I started hearing whispers again, only much louder. I looked out of my window and looked at the flooded streets. I saw strange patterns in the water again, as if it was trailing a moving object under the water. I remember that there was a crazy person stealing children at night, and decided to close my curtains so that no one could see into my room. Then the clawing and scratching began. The whispers and scratching never left, and I was surprised I even fell asleep. I was woken up by my mother and the sound of the emergency evacuation alarm that the town had set off. I was too groggy to panic, and I just followed my mom outside. We were going through our escape route that went through the higher terrain within the woods, and we all took a dirt road. As we plodded through the water, we met with Finney and his mother. They both talked for a while as we paused, awaiting others to join us. My father and a couple of his squad came through the road bearing shotguns and flashlights. My mother asked him what he was doing, and my father only replied, "We found the place they were keeping the children," in the grimmest of expressions I've ever seen. My mother kissed him goodbye and wished him and his squad good luck as they trudged through the murky, muddy waters into the deep woods. My mom mentioned for me to come with her, but suddenly another woman came asking for help. My mom told me and Finney to stay put as she left us with Finney's mother to assist the woman. We did as we were told and stood in the muddy and murky waters. We began to hear faint whispers again and felt soothingly relaxed. The feeling was ominous, and it persisted for the duration that we spent waiting for our mothers to return. I remember tripping into the water, or so I thought, until I couldn't seem to stand up. I
panicked when I felt a force pulling me into the water, and as I heard Finney's panicked screams, I felt a hand grab tightly onto my shoulder and pull me to the surface. My mother carried me and placed me onto a nearby fence and checked on me. I thought I probably tripped into a sinkhole or a deep area of the trail, since there were many holes around here. I noticed Finney's mother calling out his name and searching everywhere for him. I didn't realize that Finney had fallen in with me too. I continued thinking it was a sinkhole that we slipped into, and that's what I told Finney's mother and my mom. That is, until I felt a throbbing pain and bruise on my ankle. Upon inspecting it, we found that a skinny, bony handprint was left on it. Another loud crash of lightning occurred, and it began to rain again. We eventually reached high ground, and we got into the buses and cars that waited for us. Many of the cars there were loved ones and family that came to pick up the townspeople that evacuated. We found that my uncle was waiting for us, and we got in his car. I didn't see my dad or Finney at the evacuation area. Come to think of it, I never saw my dad or his squad again. They were announced missing, and to this day, I'm still not sure what happened to them, or Finney, along with all the other children. I'm certain of one thing. There was something in the water.
I was in Taiwan one year when I was younger, and had traveled to a busy night market. These are popular gatherings that usually operate in the evening. Nearby, I spotted a sign for a net cafe in a 5 to 6 story tall building. Thinking I'd fire off some quick emails, I walked in the dark, small entrance of the building. The aging building appeared to be not well maintained, but that was not out of the ordinary in Taiwan. The entrance just had a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the elevator call button and entered. The elevator was uncharacteristically new compared to the building, but I didn't think much of it. Like some Chinese buildings, when I looked at the floor numbers, I noticed there wasn't a 4th floor. It's considered bad luck since 4 sounds like death, so it just read 1, 2, 3, 5, 6, which was normal. I looked for the floor the net cafe was at, 6th floor, and pressed the button. The elevator lurched into action quietly and began to ascend. When it stopped, I figured it was my floor, so I instinctively began to step out. Right before stepping out, however, the sight outside the elevator stopped me. It was pitch black, only lit by the light in the elevator. It looked like it hasn't been occupied for decades. Random pieces of furniture covered with white cloth or similar were scattered around. This was a small building, so I could pretty much see the entire floor from the elevator. Thinking I must have gotten on the wrong floor, I checked the light that indicates which floor you're on. Strangely, there was nothing. None of the indicators were on, it just remained blank, but the floor button to the net cafe was still lit, so I know I haven't gotten there yet. I stood with my eyes just scanning the bizarre floor for a couple of seconds. That's when I noticed a figure moving in the distance of the floor. It was not very visible, but I could make out what looks like a person dressed in some kind of gown, moving slowly towards the elevator. I was thoroughly creeped out, so I started pressing the closed door button. As soon as I pressed it, the elevator light flickered off. I am this close to pissing my pants, and it's actually kind of freaking me out thinking back to it. The lights flickered back on under a second and the door closed. The elevator jolted back to life. A few moments later, it opened again to the net cafe. I'm beyond relieved at this point. I walked out immediately and sat down at a computer. After gathering my wits a bit, I walked over to the cashier's desk and told them what I saw.
The girl working there listened and her face turned a bit ashen, so I asked her if she had heard of similar occurrences. She told me that she'd never experienced it, but some coworkers and occasional customers have brought it up. Basically, the building has 6 floors, and the 4th floor had a history. Apparently, the floor used to be a hair salon of sorts until one of the employees killed herself there for some reason. She slit her wrists over the hair wash station and died. The store continued operations despite stories of weird appearances. When customers got their hair rinsed, the water would look a little red, like the customer was bleeding. Little things like that, and a couple people reported seeing someone's figure walking away in the mirror. Naturally, the business closed down a few months later. The building owner tried to re-rent the place out, but never had any luck. Most businesses are quite superstitious, and no one wanted to rent the 4th floor after someone had died in it, even at a very cheap price. Finally, after dropping the price to nearly nothing, a stationery supply store wanted to rent. During the renovations of the floor, however, several accidents would happen. Tools would end up in strange places, a mirror from the previous business shattered when no one was near it, and finally, a worker had his hand jammed between the elevator doors when it closed on him unexpectedly. The workers refused to continue working, and finally, the business left, and the building owner finally gave up and shut down the floor. He then had the elevator company come in to replace the panel so that the elevator could not go to the 4th floor. Let me repeat that. The elevator was programmed to never go to the 4th floor. It doesn't even have a button. But for some reason, sometimes when people take the elevator, they would go back to the 4th floor and the doors would open, and some, like myself, would see a figure walking around in the dark. Like most people, I had a sad childhood. Who doesn't these days? My father left before I was born, and my mother was on drugs from the day she brought me home. She slipped right back into her party lifestyle and turned our apartment into an opium den. I walked around in a drug-fueled haze for the first 5 years of my life. The smoky air flooded down the hallway and under my door and seemed to linger for days. My mother wasn't a bad person, just a victim of her addictions. When she did have spare money, she would put food in the house and even sometimes buy me clothes from Goodwill. The only pieces of furniture I had in my room were a box spring and mattress set and a little blue and white toy chest. Not that I had a lot of toys to put in it, just the 3 I'd gotten for the birthdays. One was an art kit, one was a red wagon, and the last, my pride and joy, was a doll named Betsy. Betsy was my best friend. We would have imaginary tea parties together, sleep together, take baths together, and sometimes I remember her speaking to me. Thinking about Betsy in adulthood has led me to believe that I was a severely traumatized child who was often high on opium, and therefore my memories were extremely unreliable. Still, I remember the sound of her voice, a high-pitched, tinkled lilt, and I remember the things she wanted me to do. Steal food for her, bring her forks, bring her knives, hit the bad man who slept on our couch. Always bad things that would get me in trouble. I would blame it on Betsy, but my mother would never believe me. Adults never do. Around my 6th birthday, I asked my mother for a birthday party. I wanted to invite the not nice girls from school, serve them cake, make them like me. I still remember standing in the kitchen with such high hopes, a glass bottle of soda shaking in my hand as I held my breath and awaited my mother's answer. She turned to me and laughed. "A birthday party? Laura, that's ridiculous. I can't afford to feed 15 other children that aren't even mine. I can barely afford to feed you. You eat like an elephant, or should I say, little Betsy does. I barely get anything to eat around here." My face fell as she shook her head, mumbled something, and stumbled off. I heard the music go up in the living room as more people walked in the door. Some left, some stayed. I knew none of them. My mother threw parties all the time. What about me? I was a child. All my friends had birthday parties, and now the mean girls would know I was too poor to have one, and they would tease me even more. I felt tears start to swell, and I ran into my room and slammed the door. Betsy was lying on the bed and smiling. She was always smiling. How could I forget? Just staring at me, smiling. She was going to tell me to do something bad, like steal more food or worse. This was her fault. Betsy didn't have to go to school. Betsy never got in trouble like I did. And in my 5-year-old little brain, I truly believed it was the doll, not my mother, who was the source of all my woes. I screamed in anger and threw the bottle as hard as I could at the bed. It hit Betsy and she fell on the floor. I laughed. I dragged her into the bathroom and threw her into our bathtub, which had always had water in it because the drains were all clogged. Of course, she didn't fight back while she was underwater, but it made me feel better. A few minutes later, after I had finished taking out my anger and humiliation on my favorite toy, I threw her in the toy chest and slammed it shut. I kicked the chest against the wall. I never wanted to see Betsy again. I never owned another doll after that. About a week later, the police came and 2 nice ladies took me to live in a new home, in a new state, with food and toys and no drugs. The trunk went into storage and the wagon disappeared. I never saw my mother again. As I got older, my foster parents admitted she was in jail, doing 25 years. I felt nothing for her anyways. I was still having nightmares because of the life she had given me. I focused on doing well in school and ignored her letters from prison. She reached out to me several times in my teens, but I always denied her calls. That is, until this morning. I'm 30 now, with my own children and a husband who loves me deeply. I have a beautiful house, 2 dogs, and a career as a social worker, trying to make a difference for kids who had it bad like me. So, when I got a voicemail from my mother, letting me know she had been paroled and wished to speak, I felt stable enough to let her say her piece. Since the kids were home from school, I went out into our shed in the backyard to return my mother's call. The shed was the children's domain, and they used to play in it all summer. I sat on my old toy chest, which was currently being used as a tea party table, and dialed the number she had left me. 3 rings. Hello? Laura? Hello, Mother. How are you? Oh, Laura. Thank you for speaking to me. I know you have your own life and family now. I would love to meet them someday. I just wanted to tell you how sorry I am for everything. You're not going to meet my kids, ever. I'm going to say my piece here too. The drugs destroyed you, and you took me down alongside you. Honestly, I'm surprised it took you so long to get caught. I'm not sure what you mean about being caught, Laura. I honestly know nothing. Look, it hardly matters. I do understand why you would feel that way. Why you would hate me and not want me to meet your little ones. I learned a lot about Jesus and forgiveness while I was away, and just... Oh, Laura. I'm so sorry about Betsy. Betsy? I paused, confused. Why would you care about her? I know, Laura. Believe me, I do. It was all my fault. The drugs and Betsy. Oh God. If I had only been able to see through the haze. If I had only known. She's gone forever, and it's all my fault. As my mother began to cry, I tapped my fingers on the toy box impatiently. The drugs had clearly fried my mother's brain. Mother, why are you talking about Betsy? Why do you even care? I know where Betsy is, right underneath me. You do? What are you talking about, Laura? Oh God, where is she? I shifted uncomfortably. Betsy is in the trunk. I honestly thought she had hung up. I heard nothing on the other end. not even breathing. What do you mean your sister's in the trunk? Sister? What the hell are you talking about? Back on drugs so soon, Mother? Betsy's a goddamn doll. I locked her in a toy box a few days before you got arrested for opium possession. Laura. Oh, God. No, Laura. I wasn't arrested because of the drugs. I was arrested because of Betsy's disappearance. You always called her your little doll, but we all thought you knew. Oh, God. What did you do? Laura, what did you do to my baby? With no emotion, I set the phone next to me and stood up. I can hear the distant sound of my mother's anguished cries and feel the dark clutch of agony in my own chest. Memories were stirring in the back of my mind, threatening to come flooding forward into my consciousness. Pushing against the door in my head, a door that had been locked so tightly for so long, I had forgotten it was there. Could the trauma and the drugs have really led me to believe that a small child was actually a doll? Asking for food, asking for utensils to eat with, asking me to protect her from the bad man. No. I slowly turned around and brought my eyes down to the chest. Surely it was too small. You couldn't fit a person in there. You couldn't. But what about a very small, starving, emaciated child? What about her? If I were an investigator looking for a child, I would never consider looking in this chest. It was just too small. I knelt down to the ground and unclipped the clasps. It would be better not to look. After all that I had overcome, this new life that I had earned, it could be all undone by opening this toy box. I shouldn't open it. I should throw it in a landfill and forget it ever existed. I should not look inside. I opened the chest. It never had a doll. My mother could not afford to buy me one. I never had a wagon either, but I did have a toy box, a pretty blue and white toy box. And when I was 5, I drowned my 2-year-old sister and put her in it, and now my life is ruined. Beginning in early April 1986, the people in and around the little-known Chernobyl nuclear power plant began to experience a series of strange events revolving around sightings of a mysterious creature described as a large, dark, and mutated man with gigantic wings and piercing red eyes. People affected by this phenomena experienced horrific nightmares, threatening phone calls, and first-hand encounters with the winged beast which became known as the Blackbird of Chernobyl. Reports of these strange happenings continued to increase until the morning of April 26, 1986, when at 1:23 a.m., Reactor 4 of the Chernobyl nuclear power plant suffered a catastrophic steam explosion that resulted in a fire which caused a series of additional explosions followed by a nuclear meltdown. The power plant, located near Pripyat, Ukraine, Soviet Union, spewed a plume of radioactive fallout which drifted over parts of the Western Soviet Union, Eastern and Western Europe, Scandinavia, the UK, Ireland, and Eastern North America. Large areas of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia were badly contaminated, resulting in the evacuation and resettlement of over 336,000 people. The Chernobyl disaster, as the incident was dubbed, is considered the worst accident ever in the history of nuclear power. Following the meltdown and subsequent explosions and fires, Soviet helicopters were dispatched to the scene, equipped with special firefighting gear. These helicopters circled the plant, dropping clay, sand, lead, and other extinguishing chemicals on the burning facility. Most of the fire was put out by 5 a.m., with the fire burning within the Reactor 4 continuing to blaze for several hours after. The firefighters who responded were unaware of the nature of the fire, assuming that it was simply an electrical fire and received massive overdoses of radiation, leading to many of their deaths, including Lieutenant Vladimir Pravik, who died on May 9th, 1986. The workers who survived the initial blast and fire, but would later die of radiation poisoning, claimed to have witnessed what has been described as a large black bird-like creature with a 20-foot wingspan gliding through the swirling plumes of irradiated smoke pouring from the reactor. No further sightings of the Blackbird of Chernobyl were reported after the Chernobyl disaster, leaving researchers to speculate just what haunted the workers of the plant during the days leading up to the disaster. The most commonly accepted theory suggests that the Blackbird of Chernobyl may have been the same creature spotted in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, leading up to the collapse of the Silver Bridge on December 15, 1968. Investigators have suggested that the appearance of this creature is an omen of disasters to come in the area in which it shows itself. The physical description of both the Blackbird of Chernobyl and the Mothman, the creature sighted in West Virginia, are very similar, and the reports of nightmares and threatening phone calls leading up to these disasters are shared in both cases. A second, less accepted theory suggests that the Blackbird of Chernobyl was nothing more than the misidentification of the black stork, an endangered species endemic to southern Eurasia. The black stork stands nearly 3 feet tall and has a wingspan of nearly 6 feet. This theory, however, fails to take into account the menacing phone calls and disturbing nightmares. Also, the physical description given by the majority of eyewitnesses who actually saw the Blackbird of Chernobyl does not in any way match the physical appearance of the black stork. Both the Blackbird of Chernobyl and the Mothman have not been sighted since their respective disasters, leaving us with many unanswered questions. All we can do is just wait for the beast to show itself again and give us a chance to figure out just what it may be. Unfortunately, it would appear that for this creature to show up again, we will have to anticipate some form of disaster in the area it is selected to appear.